Previously, in Playing with New Thinking, the first episode of this 7-arc series, I talked about how the new discoveries of the space age were changing the ways in which we thought about the cosmos. We're making observations that had been undetectable by our biological senses. They are now confronting us with evidence that doesn't fit with the ways of thinking that have become so familiar that we take them for granted. The night sky isn't dark and empty to electronic sensors, but bright and full. There's no precedence for this in all of human existence. The universe of our senses is radically changed, but it's still human minds who try to make sense of it. Making sense is a creative act, and that works best when we don't take it too seriously. In this episode, we'll be playing with historical thinking. Knowledge tends to progress incrementally for long periods as popular theories are developed and adjusted to fit each other and discrepant evidence. But occasionally, the inevitable contradictions and ad hoc additions become a hindrance to further progress. Patching the popular theories becomes cumbersome and ugly. Entirely fresh foundational ideas become necessary. New metaphysical assumptions that underlie any theory are required. The worldview, the paradigm changes. For example, Ptolemy's geocentric model of planetary movements with perfect circle epicycles spinning on perfect circle deferents was geometrical, no orbits, and kinematic, no force. It was good enough for casting horoscopes, which was the goal at that time. Its practitioners didn't worry about the little inaccuracies relative to the precision of the instruments they used, but they did worry about the linear element, the equant, that corrected for the greater inaccuracies. They presumed the heavens of the gods were perfect and therefore operated only with perfect circles. Copernicus's heliocentric model was not that much of a cognitive revolution. He kept the epicycles and deferents. He only discovered that centering them on the sun eliminated the equant, thus making the system more perfect. He revised the structure of the Ptolemaic model, but not the way of thinking on which it was founded. The physics changed, but the metaphysics didn't. The cognitive revolution began with Tycho Brahe building more precise measuring instruments. Kepler then realized that Brahe's more precise locations could be better matched with ellipses than with perfect circles. But the perfect heavens worldview didn't allow ellipses. At the same time, Galileo's telescopic observations confirmed the existence of imperfections, spots on the sun. Other observations also contributed to doubting the perfection of the heavens. Newton's idea of a central force, gravity, acting on orbiting masses not only allowed but required ellipses. The revolution was the replacement of a kinematic and geometric way of thinking with a dynamic one. At first, people objected that Newton was promoting an occult, spooky action at a distance, but the accuracy of his results eclipsed the uneasiness. Soon, gravity displaced circles. The theories changed. The math changed. Calculus replaced geometry. Many of the assumptions changed, and the ancient worldview changed with them. But one underlying assumption of the perfect heavens of the gods persisted. Alexander Pope wrote, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in the night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." The underlying attitude of belief in one absolute perfect reality, independent of cognitive operations, persisted. Perfect circles were replaced with perfect clockwork. A reified natural law, mistaking an abstraction for a physical entity, became the new God. Metaphysics never changes 100%. It's still human minds with their inertia of prior beliefs that make the new sense. The progress of instrumentation wouldn't reveal discrepancies between Newtonian theory and evidence for a couple of centuries. Even then, and still to today, the idea of gravity was good enough for the ballistic goals that the invention of cannons and rockets had made more important than the goals of casting horoscopes. But in the 19th century, Michelson and Morley's observations of the invariance of the speed of light, along with other difficulties, generated a crisis for Newton's model. Time was independent and absolute in Newton's theory, but more precise observations seemed to indicate that it varied with velocity, especially as velocity approached the speed of light. Fast-moving objects seemed both to weigh more and to shrink, and their clocks ticked at different rates. Einstein resolved the difficulties in the next century by returning to geometry. The non-Euclidean geometry of a curved coordinate system made more accurate sense of those new observations. Celestial bodies were no longer propelled along orbits by a distant spooky force, but coasted along geodesics. Yet still, in this age of relativity, people still talk about gravity as a force, and the speed of light is the new absolute. Now, new instruments observe the heavens in ways that have been inaccessible to our biological senses. Radio waves, infrared, ultraviolet, X and gamma rays, in-place measurements of bodies in space and of that space itself, orders of magnitude more precise observations and data. The resulting evidence reveals motions, forms, and compositions that are generating a crisis for the conventional models. The night sky is no longer dark and empty, but bright and full of plasma, and the experimentally discovered behaviors of electrically active plasma make more accurate and direct sense of the evidence than the predictions of the gravity and gas models. For example, both Herbig-Haro stars and active galaxies exhibit thin, twisting threads of plasma from their poles that extend many light years into space. Condensations or blobs are often scattered along them. They give off synchrotron radiation from electrons spiraling in strong magnetic fields. These are impossible in a purely gravity and gas universe, but are expected in an electricity and plasma one. In the standard model, plasma is often called an ionized gas, and then the discussion relapses into gravity and gas descriptions. Million-degree hot gas, shock waves, jets, gravitationally collapsing clouds. But plasma doesn't behave like a gas, and descriptions based on gas theory fail to describe the matter accurately. Any substance at 1,000,000 degrees is fully ionized and behaves as a plasma, not as a gas. Even cold molecular clouds contain enough charged dust particles and ions to act like plasma. Concepts of pressure and volume are supplanted by the Bennett pinch and double layers. Those particles and ions have extremely low densities. If they were electrically neutral, as assumed by the standard model, they could travel long distances before colliding with another particle. They would be unlikely to generate a shock wave with billiard ball-like collisions. But they are carrying an extensive electromagnetic field. They constitute plasma and display typical plasma behavior, filaments, cells, double layers, and the like. Shock waves are the closest thing astronomers can imagine to the electrical effects they deny. If the threads of plasma spiraling out of the poles of stars were jets subject to gas laws, they would soon dissipate in the vacuum of space. But they remain coherent for long distances, spiraling around each other like Birkeland currents. Gravitational collapse in the standard model itself is actually very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Any rotational motion in the original cloud will be amplified as the cloud collapses, like spinning ice skaters drawing in their arms. The centrifugal force will soon reach equilibrium with the gravitational force, and the collapse will stop. Plasma, on the other hand, requires collapse, Bennett pinch, and spin, the response of moving charged particles in a magnetic field, and those forces can be much stronger than gravity. They can also repel, not just attract, as with gravity, as seen in the long-range attraction and short-range repulsion that keeps Birkeland filaments twisting around each other without merging. To explain, or to explain away, the new evidence, the gravity and gas theories have been patched with hypothetical, unobservable, and untestable phantoms: collapsed matter, dark energy. The phantoms must be there to save the theories from falsification and the need to change deep-seated habits of thinking. Theorists overlook that they have inverted empirical methods, assumed that their theories are the touchstone of truth, and are judging the acceptability of evidence by its conformity with their prior beliefs. But as the patches proliferate, the stitches have begun to obscure the theories and to weaken the underlying metaphysics of empirical methods. The standard model of the gravity and gas paradigm no longer provides a straightforward explanatory structure, but has become a nuisance. Gravity and gas don't allow for electricity in space. Plasma requires it. That's a fundamental distinction between the standard model and the EU model. From a historical point of view, it's time for another conceptual revolution.